House will come back to order. Representative Wilms.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is really a momentous vote. I'm only in my third year here. Many of you have been here a lot longer. But, you know, this seems to me like, of all the votes that I've cast in the last 3 years, this is probably the most important, by far. And here's why. You know, I serve on appropriations and for the last 3 years, and we've had a lot of hearings where we hear about fixed costs. Well, we can't do anything. Those costs are fixed. You know, wages are fixed, healthcare is fixed, pensions are fixed, OPEB is fixed, debt service is fixed. Everything's fixed, or a lot of things are fixed. And so if we're going to balance the budget, what we have to work with on the spending side is restricted or constrained. Those are the variable costs. Inevitably, the variable costs are the services I think that many of us would like to see government do, helping those with disabilities, our parks, our roads, railroads, and so on. So the question is, you know, how did all these things get fixed? Was this something that came from the Almighty in an edict? No, the answer is our predecessors made choices. Where we are today is the result of choices that were made by our predecessors. And the choices that they made, we have to live with. And we are living with them. And today, we get to make a choice. And the result of our choice today is going to impact our successors 5, 10 years down the road. And so for those of us who may not be here during, 5 or 10 years from now, when our successors ask, gee, how did these things get fixed? How did we get to where we are? Well, they can just look at us right now, because we're at a choice point, a very important one, that will determine which way our state goes. And why is it so important? It's because we're in the middle of an economic and fiscal crisis. And how do you quantify a fiscal crisis? Well, I guess to put it really simply, in my mind, the way I think about things is if at this point revenues are growing at 0 or maybe 0.5%, and expenses are growing at 5 or 6% every year, and legally we have to have a balanced budget, that's a crisis, because things are out of balance. Things are out of whack. And so when we're looking to address this crisis, we need to ask ourselves, does this action solve the crisis? Does it get the job done? I respectfully suggest that it's not, well, this is the best we could do, under the circumstances, this is where we're at. The real question is, does this get the job done? And it kind of strikes me like, I'm going back to my high school days. I ran track in high school, and those of you know there's the high school track. I'm dating myself. We ran miles back then. We didn't run kilometers, but it was 4 laps around the track. 4 laps equaled a mile. And this deal here admittedly has some good things. It does. There's wage freezes. There's pension reform. There's OPEB reform. There's healthcare reform. And there's no denying that. But it strikes me as like we've run about 1.5 laps. We need to run 4 to solve the crisis, run a mile. But it's like we ran 1.5 laps, which is better than 0, but then we stopped. Okay, we're at 1.5 laps, this is a mile, this is the best we can do, now let's just take our marbles and go home. But it's not the best. It doesn't get the job done. And let's go into a few things here. First of all, I understand the proponent of the bill talked about the sanctity of contracts. And I don't think there's anyone here in this chamber, certainly not me, who's suggesting that we unilaterally abrogate an existing contract. So SEBAC, for example, is locked until 2022. I respect that. I think it was a mistake for Governor Rowland to lock in a 20-year deal back in the 1990s. It was a huge mistake. I think it was a further mistake for Governor Malloy to do, I think, 10 years back, several years ago. And here we are, we're proposing to perhaps do it again for another 5 years on top of the current 5 years. There are some things, though, where we do have freedom of action. On wages, on layoffs, on furlough days, on pay cuts, on the teacher's pension. And also, I believe about 20% of our workforce is not unionized. The fact is that our predecessors made a choice. They created the collective bargaining system that we are operating under. It was a choice. And respectfully, very few states in our country have made the same choice that we have. To my understanding, my understanding is 44 or 45 states in our country do not use our system. They use a more statutorily based system. We're one of 4 or 5, I believe, that use collective bargaining to this extent. So we clearly made a choice to pursue this particular route. And many of our other colleagues have made different choices. And so the question is, is this still the right choice for us today? I get that, some may say, yes, it is. We should continue this system. This is a good system. And I personally have nothing against collective bargaining or union membership. It is what it is. I think a lot of unions came about because there were abuses and that happened in the past. And so I can understand that. I get that. But we're in a fiscal crisis. And is this system, has it helped or has it hurt? It seems to me it's hurt. Because what we've done is our predecessors made choices that locked in costs in roughly 40% of our budget that we are now having to deal with having these budget crises year after year after year after year. And so it seems to me that we need to be open to looking at different options. Not for any ideological reason, but because we need to focus on what gets the job done. And respectfully, I don't think this is getting the job done. I believe that if we choose to move this forward, and if the Senate chooses to move it forward, we are essentially repeating the mistakes that our predecessors made 20 and 10 years ago. Because I believe that while, yes, we get a lap and a half, which is better than zero, but what are we giving up? We're locking in our benefits for 10 more years. We're preventing layoffs for 4 more years. We're fixing our costs. We are choosing to fix our costs again, like our predecessors, for 4 and 10 years. And we're choosing to do that in a very unstable and uncertain environment. Let's look at our economic situation. Would any of us here believe that we are in a thriving, growing, vibrant economy right now? I don't think so. Our revenues have been declining each and every year. It's more likely than not that in the next 10 years we're going to have a recession. I hope we don't, but I would say it's more than likely that we will. And that, if I look at our past recessions, that usually takes about a 2-year bite out of whatever we do. And so, doesn't it make sense that if on the revenue side we have an uncertain, unpredictable, or a negative trend line environment, is this the right time for us now to fix our costs for 4 years and then 10 years? Shouldn't we maybe be unfixing them to give ourselves the flexibility so that we can react? And it kind of leads to the question of who are we really reacting for and to? Who serves whom? I believe that we here in government were elected by the people to serve the people of Connecticut. And to my understanding, our population is about 3.5 million people. We are elected to serve 3.5 million citizens of Connecticut. My understanding is that and we've chosen to allow our employees in government to create unions, and my understanding is about 50,000 employees who are unionized. Sometimes I wonder who we really serve. Are we serving our employees' union leaders? Or are we serving the people of Connecticut? I sometimes wonder. I don't know of anyone else in Connecticut who is able to collectively bargain and arbitrate their way out of a fiscal crisis. And essentially what we're saying here is we vote for this, we are going to create a protected class of individuals, roughly 50,000, who do great work and certainly deserve to be compensated at least at whatever the comparable private sector level is, and that we need to honor all our obligations to them. But we're essentially carving them out from our fiscal crisis and our economic crisis. And that's 50,000 people. But there's 3.5 million citizens in our state. What about them? They're not carved out. They're not protected for the next 10 years or 4 years. They have to face our crisis each and every day. And I guess my question is, why are we creating such a protected class for such a long period of time? Why are we? I don't know. I can't figure it out. Seems to me that if we were serving the people of Connecticut, that's where our focus would be. And I believe the people of Connecticut are asking us to fix the fiscal and economic crisis that we are all collectively dealing with. And why are we focusing on the employees? It's not because we want to pick on them, but it's because they're 40% of our cost structure. And if the 40% was named, I don't know, the Fred Wilms Trust Fund, for example, we should be focusing on that because it's such a large number. And it just so happens that 40% happens to be employee compensation. And so, it just seems to me that what we need to do in this uncertain economic environment, we need to be not locking things in for a long, long period of time. Is it the best deal that we could get? I don't know. I mean, before I was here, I chaired the Board of Estimate for Norwalk for 8 years. We were involved in a lot of municipal contract negotiations. I have to say that when I started serving here on appropriations, I really haven't found the state negotiators to be all that impressive, quite frankly. I really haven't. I found the union leaders, when they've spoken to appropriations, on the other hand, I found them to be incredibly impressive. They were focused, on point, knew that as a union, they had different set of economic interests than we do as a state, as their employer. Very on point. I kind of wish almost we had them negotiating on our behalf. But I found our negotiators, they didn't really seem to get that they're supposed to be negotiating on behalf of the state as an employer, and we and the citizens whom we represent have a different set of economic interests. And so, is it the best deal that we could get? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I heard a comment before about, there's these, contract extensions, and I guess the part that confuses me is sort of like, it's like, well, even though the contract's expired, it's really not expired. So I don't know which one it is. Is it expired? Is it not expired? I guess the question is, does it ever expire? Or have we created a sort of a robotic, never-ending system that we can never, ever, ever, at any point in time in the future, choose to, let's say, move outside of the collective bargain environment, because we have these extensions that, I don't know how long they go for, but I respectfully don't know if I agree with that legal analysis, and certainly the lawyers that we've spoken to, have a different view. But certainly as a state, we created the system. It exists because we wrote the statutes. And so to now suggest that somehow we are so beholden that we can't get out of it, I respectfully don't see it that way. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll just say this. I was talking with some of my colleagues who've been here a long time, and they brought up the income tax back in the early 90s when Weicker was governor, and I know there's a lot of back and forth with that, and I think obviously it passed, and I guess some members changed their minds because there was, candidly, it was very frustrating and very painful. I think we all get that, a lot of late nights, a lot of things going on, a lot of stress, a lot of back and forth, but the pot at the end of the rainbow was, look, all this misery we're going through here on the floor is going to go away if we just vote for the income tax. The money will come in, the budget will be okay, and everything's great. You can go back home and, we can all resume our normal lives again and everything's going to be okay. That's not the case here. This is the reverse. I respectfully suggest that if we put this through, it doesn't solve our problems. We don't reach the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. We don't go home, it's like, okay, problem solved, We never have to deal with this budget stuff again. Next year, it's going to be great. The year after that, it's going to be even better. Everything's going to be great. We can all move on to other things. Things are going to return back to normal. Respectfully, that's not going to be the case. We're going to be, unless the economy just takes off, and we get 3, 4, 5% growth every year, we don't have a recession. If that happens, then I think, we're okay. But if we don't get that, if we stay around zero, if our growth is maybe 1%, if we have a recession, we are going to be back here. And it's just going to be even more and more and more painful. And so I'm going to conclude by saying that before any of us vote here today, please be mindful of that. We're not just voting for now. We're not just voting for this 2-year budget and then everything's okay. We are voting for the next 10 years. And at the end of the day, do I or do you or do we want our successors to point their fingers back at us and say, you know what, you guys, you should have voted differently. You should have acted differently because here we are now and it's still a mess. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.